this quarter was going to grow nicely, not as high as 38%. So I think the year will be mid-20s growth. Half of our new customers in digital marketing services never advertised on radio before. That's powerful because it talks to the relationships that our salespeople have on the street, and that's augmented by the hiring we've done with digital-only sellers, people who only have sold digital in the past. And so when you grow the pie, get new customers, which are additive to the company, and some of them are actually advertising on radio where they haven't in the past. Then on top of that, if you increase the attachment rate, meaning legacy radio advertisers who haven't previously purchased digital but now see the power of that, that creates a great environment for growth. So I would expect the opportunity for us is to grow very strongly next year. And
do you have a thought about when, how much as a percent of total revenues your digital marketing services business could be? You've given some guidelines in terms of what the growth rate of the industry might be. But.
Right. So our total digital revenues are the run rate is roughly $160 million. And I think I've said on the last earnings call that our DMS business is a little bit more than a third of that. So call that a $45 or $50 million business. I think digital, it's not guidance, but I think digital in its entirety could be well north of $200 million in the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. And the strength, is driven by the growth of DMS. And the important part of the DMS business for us, not only it deepens the relationships, but now as we get bigger in scale and we deal with larger customers, we're taking some of the fulfillment in-house. So we white labeled a lot of the fulfillment in the past. But for large customers, we're hiring account managers who can fulfill internally. And what that does is we have a closer contact to the clients, but we're also improving the margin on those clients by 5 to 10 points, which is significant.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could you talked about the revenues, and I was wondering if you could just talk about DMS margins and compare that to the rest of the business.
Sure. So when we think about the margin profile or business, and I'll talk about unit contributions, so the incremental revenues we get for each incremental dollar. Our highest margin business is our legacy radio business, and that is an 85% contribution margin. The next highest is streaming. Streaming is about 80%. Even though you're listening to substantially the same content, the difference between streaming and over the air is that we have to pay a music rights fees for the streaming, so that's why it's 80%. DMS has approximately a 30 to 35% unit contribution margin, but that's going to grow over time as we bring fulfillment in-house. And then the lowest margin is podcasting. That's about 25%. And the reason that's a lower margin business is, unlike other companies, our business in podcasting is we rep talent. So in other words, Bongino owns his IP, we're his sales force, and we have a revenue share. That's different than a studio model where companies will create content and hopefully they get hits, and the studio business can be interesting, but you're going to have hits or misses, so it's a riskier business.
You talked a little bit about streaming and podcast. I was just wondering, how do those segments fit into the overall business going forward?
Well, streaming is really core to our business. And the reason it's core to their business is that we're agnostic as to where our clients get our content. So if they can't get the content over the air, they will find it in the stream. That's great. And the great thing about streaming for us, there are different revenue channels that come from streaming. The highest revenue channel is when we can go locally and we have the specific data of the listenership. Those CPMs are high when we sell them locally. We also, since we generate so many impressions, we can also package those impressions through a network type of buy. We do have companies who want to buy impressions in bulk, that we can sell them to them. And then we have the programmatic marketplace, which is a very efficient way to sell inventory. So when we think about streaming in general, you think about the supply and demand. The supply is all the impressions we generate, and then the demand, which is what are the best ways to sell those impressions. And of course, we focus on the waterfall, which is selling the most expensive first. And that's the way of the future. You see that in TV, you see that in any media. So that's really core to our business.
And it's just kind of moving on to expenses. You reduced the company's fixed cost by over 120 million since 2019. I know since ever you've been there, you've been cutting costs, it seems, and trying to kind of get right-size the ship. But how do you balance the fixed cost reductions, and while you're still investing, obviously, in your digital, how do you balance that?
Yep, good question. By way of background, I started as a CFO of the company the third week of March of 2020. And I did not meet any of the senior management team for 18 months. And so it's hard to run a public company in that context. So that's what Mike's alluding to in terms of cost cuts. Look, we are in businesses that are going through change. We have to look at things differently. And for someone like the CEO and me, we're not longtime radio people, but we're longtime financial executives. So we can look at a business through a different lens to re-engineer business, as opposed to being wed to legacy assets because they're wed to legacy assets. So these cost cuts have been difficult. We have a smaller workforce today. One thing we haven't cut is sales. Sales is critical to our business. So when we think about how we run the business, we look at preserving the front of the house in terms of generating revenue and reducing our cost base. So where we reduced our costs, people efficiencies, centralized operations, outsourcing, looking critically in terms of all of our stations and saying, well, do we need as many people in certain day parts to generate the revenues? We've renegotiated contracts. Our real estate footprint is much smaller. And we've been very focused on business process optimization. And so I often get the question, well, you've taken out over 20% of your fixed costs of the business. Can you take out more? And I sort of say, watch me. Because you can. Because when you look at the company through a different lens, it's tough. We all want to be in a growing environment and benefit from that. But you have to make the decisions, which frankly is best for the long-term health of the company. And this industry is going to look a lot different 3 to 5 years from now than it does today.
Yeah, and a lot of the companies are talking about AI and how they're implementing AI and what this might mean to their business. And it seems like in media, particularly radio and even television, that there's just this huge opportunity to use AI. Can you talk a little bit about how Cumulus views AI and what the opportunities might be there?
Look, I think it's early on, but we're already using it in several areas. Through our business functions, we're becoming more efficient. And through our contractors or financial vendors, we're getting price reductions because they're efficient on the back end. So we're asking and demanding and receiving that. Our programming and creating logs and matching orders and logs using AI helps out. I think over time, you're going to see more tests on radio in a box type of technology where some stations may not have live personalities on there. I think we need to be very careful because one of the strengths of radio is being live and local. And so I think that can be done selectively, but I think we have to be careful. The IP around AI is actually a big issue for media, and we'll work on. So I would say it's early days, but I think the future of AI in our business is tremendous and will help the efficiency of our business.
Well, it's really interesting if you can have an AI personality. That'd be something.
Yeah.
So obviously we have a new administration in just a recent election. There's been obviously the administration gets to pick the FCC and lead the FCC, and we have now a Republican-led FCC, or we'll have. So what do you think the impact might be on a new Trump administration?
So there's been a lot discussed about deregulation, and particularly with regard to M&A. We've always been an advocate of consolidation, an advocate of taking out the barriers to creating business efficiencies. A lot of the restrictions on legacy media goes back on legacy times where there were far fewer advertisers, channels. Digital wasn't as big, and the concern that you had to protect certain markets. So lifting the caps to some degree is a good thing. Promoting M&A is a good thing. There was a deal a couple of years ago that didn't go through, not in radio, but in TV, Tegna. That didn't go through based on what was perceived, the DOJ issues. It just didn't go through because the FCC didn't approve it. We can debate whether or not that was political or not. So broadly, an environment that encourages or doesn't prevent M&A is good for everyone. And look, in our industry, the playbook for legacy businesses which have decent growth prospects, but not crazy, like technology, the playbook is to grow equity value through consolidation, get synergies, and we're all for that.
Yeah, and typically, whenever there has been deregulation in the past, there's always been a lift in multiples in the stocks. So that's always been an interesting prospect, certainly if that happens. The management team historically done a really good job at monetizing non-core assets. And remember a lot of real estate sales. And I was wondering, how do you think about asset sales in the future? If you could talk a little bit about the prospect of whatever you might see as non-core assets.
Right. So we have monetized a whole bunch of non-core assets in the past 4 years, and the magnitude of what we have now potentially to sell is more limited, but we still have quite a bit of assets. So for example, we have multiple acres of land where we have studios in Nashville. That's a vibrant market. The commercial real estate market is sort of challenged in Nashville, but that's a nice piece of property that we have. A couple years ago, not a couple years ago, last year we sold 2 stations individually to religious broadcasters. We generated $17 million of gross proceeds. One was a station in Detroit, another one was in Westchester. The EBITDA contribution of those stations were 0, so that was hugely accretive. We did a tower leaseback deal with Vertical Bridge back in 2020, and I'm not sure if you know this or we talked about this. They own the land underneath all the towers that we did this leaseback. However, as part of our agreement, if they sell land, we get 50% of the proceeds. And historically, a lot of these towers are on big swaths of land. It may take a while to monetize because developers have to get the approvals locally. But selectively, there are opportunities for them to sell and for us to get 50% of the proceeds. So individually, none of these are enormous, but collectively, they add up. And so we've been able, I would say, in the past several years, things happen that we can generate 10 or 15 million of proceeds from asset sales that don't affect EBITDA. They're episodic. They're hard to plan for, but I think that's a good opportunity for us going forward.
You know, the interesting thing too is about the land. AM stations obviously have the biggest land footprint because of the towers they require. And so you have a huge amount of land for AM stations. And I know you have quite a few AM stations.
Correct.
Is there a way to monetize the land and still keep an AM station?
Well, the deal with Vertical Bridge would be if we sell the land, then they'd have to find real estate for us on another tower, such that we have the same.
And you could just relocate the station to a different tower.
Yeah,
If that,
the signal, yeah.
yeah. And how is the relationship with them? Can you facilitate the sale, or I mean, could you tell me, hey, we need a little extra cash here, or?
Well, we have a great relationship with them. And by the way, it's a win-win for them too, right? Because they get extra proceeds, they still get the rent. So we're all aligned. Given our local connections, and look, there are a couple opportunities that have recently come up where someone has come to us and say, you know, that land is really interesting. We think it's worth X. We think you can get development rights. We'll talk to them about it. They'll run it down. I mean, look, they're the ones who have to make the decision. But again, from their perspective, it's really a win-win because if they get the same rent from us, get extra proceeds, that's gravy. So we're aligned in that way. We present them what we think are opportunities. They do the same way, so it's a great relationship.
Do you have a number that is a potential, like if you were to say, okay, in 2025, this could be a prospect?
I know you're going to ask that. The answer is not really at this point because we're evaluating several sites. A lot of that's contingent on getting development rights. And as you can imagine, someone can say it's worth X, but an investor has to buy into it and then have to think, what's the timeline? So things we identified today may close in 25, may close in 26. So that's why I'm hesitant.
Gotcha.
But there's some things in the hopper which are not insignificant.
All right, great. Well, that's all we have time for.
Great.
We wish you great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
With more than 6,000 small and micro cap companies listed, if you're looking for the next Apple, then Channel Check truly is the orchard. It's an investor community where you can access independent Wall Street research, advanced market data, balanced news, corporate videos, and podcasts. You can even register to attend in-person Meet the Management Series luncheons and to be part of the preeminent annual Small and Microcap Investor Conference, NobleCon. And here's the best news. Since Channel Check is sponsored by the featured companies, premium membership requires no investment. It's absolutely free. So check it out. Log in today. Find out why Channel Check is North America's leading source of research on the companies that just may change the world.